I got epic revenge on my cheating wife. Served divorce papers hidden inside her birthday cake. Maybe I do, Kendra replied cautiously. Carrie leaned in. I told them, when their so-called friends with benefits were whining and dining them. It wasn't out of generosity. They were being paid in advance. Hey, how was your day? You were having a relaxing time today and remembered Reddit cheating stories. Thank you for that. Here's a really dramatic story for you. I made one last sweep of the house to ensure nothing important was left behind. My bags were packed for what my wife of 25 years believed was a business trip. I had told her I'd be parking my company car at the airport, though it was actually still at the office alongside other work-related items. At 45, I had taken early retirement after a quarter-century in management, opting for 3/4 of the full retirement benefits. I had regularly invested my stock options into my company's retirement account, minimizing taxes and securing a comfortable retirement check that exceeded my previous salary. My tech investments had paid off, and now those retirement checks were deposited into a new Bank of America account. Last Friday, I had deposited my final paycheck, which included vacation pay and a substantial $850,000 from sold stock options. The timing wasn't random. I delayed the deposit to ensure it wouldn't be considered marital property. While the company was happy to replace me with someone at half the cost, I was content to leave behind a job I despised and a wife whose recent behavior had revealed a different side of her. I had made other preparations too. My expensive suits were donated to Goodwill, leaving me with just one. My possessions were downsized to essentials, and I rented a one-way U-Haul through my family trust under my Uncle John's name. I paid in cash to ensure there were no traces leading back to me. I was leaving the West Coast for my small hometown, a place where neighbors were distant and life was simpler. My wife, Kendra, had long forgotten about my parents' farm, a property she despised and, ironically, one of the few assets excluded from our marital portfolio. The farm, rented to local farmers, had quietly built an emergency fund while I focused on my career. This move wasn't just about escaping my wife's recent infidelity. It was a realization that I had spent years with someone I barely recognized anymore. I was ready to embrace a new future, one where I could work with my hands, fixing tractors and heavy equipment, rather than managing their design and production. Before leaving, I called Kendra to confirm her flight schedule. She said she couldn't wait to come home after 2 weeks away for work, living out of a suitcase. She had no idea what was really coming. My 3 daughters and their husbands were scheduled to arrive 2 hours before Kendra to set up a surprise birthday party for her. Over 50 family members and friends were attending, including her boss and his wife. My daughters didn't know the full extent of the surprise, only that I had recorded a birthday message for their mother, which they were to play on the patio TV toward the end of the evening. Unbeknownst to them, that message wasn't just a birthday greeting. It was my final goodbye to Kendra and the moment when the truth about her affair would come to light. Earlier, I had shown the investigators' report to David, my eldest daughter's husband and a trusted confidant from my former job. As an accountant, he knew my retirement plans in detail and initially doubted my suspicions about Kendra. Once I showed him the evidence, though, there was no denying the truth. David would learn even more tonight, as would everyone else, in a way that would leave no room for excuses or denials. Regret lingered briefly, but I reminded myself why this was necessary. Sometimes, the hardest truths are the ones that need to be exposed. Before leaving, I followed my lawyer's advice to remove all my online contact information and even deleted my Facebook account. He said it was better to let Kendra worry about the unknown. I agreed. After all, in our state, she'd get half regardless. I sent my lawyer detailed records of our bank balances and small debts, as well as the latest property tax assessment of our house. With my share, I could easily buy a new home and furnish it comfortably. On my way out, I tossed my old cell phone into the trash under the kitchen sink, ensuring nothing I did would be noticed until after the party. Leaving California after 25 years wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I was heading back to South Dakota, returning to the small-town life I had left behind. Though bittersweet, I was ready for a fresh start. Fewer than 10 people outside my family would even notice my absence. As I began the drive east, I stopped to buy a new phone getting a local number for my future home. I made one call, giving my new number to a trusted contact. Once the call was done, I turned the phone off, saving it for emergencies. The prospect of driving through the countryside in March, with spring just beginning to bloom, gave me a sense of peace. Kendra and I met years ago at an Aerosmith concert. She was a California native, and I was just passing through. We married a year later on the same day. My parents flew in for the ceremony. I worked in research and development while Kendra excelled in importing and marketing. For years, we built our lives together, raising 3 daughters and maintaining stable careers. Kendra still turned heads wherever she went, dressed impeccably and showing off her figure. I couldn't say the same for myself. I had the typical dad bod, complete with a belly. Kendra, however, preferred her carefully curated image. She had just returned from 2 weeks with her boss and lover, Eric Hopper, on what she claimed was an essential business trip. While Kendra enjoyed the thrill of her affair, she looked forward to returning to her regular routine. 2 weeks of nightly rendezvous were exhilarating, but she still valued the comfort of her twice-weekly intimacy with her unsuspecting husband. After landing and clearing the airport, Kendra drove her company car home. She was surprised to find a full-blown birthday party in her honor, with all 3 daughters and their husbands in attendance. The celebration was lively, featuring family, friends, and even co-workers. When her boss Eric and his wife arrived, Kendra was taken aback. She asked her eldest daughter who had invited them, and her daughter replied with a smile, "I did. Your boss always brags about you." And his wife wanted to meet the woman behind the success. The attention made Kendra feel proud and appreciated. At around 8 p.m., the party reached its peak. My daughters stood to congratulate their mother, saying, "Dad couldn't be here, but he recorded a special message for you." They turned on the 80-inch TV, and my voice filled the patio, wishing Kendra a happy birthday. I started by reminiscing about highlights from the past year, including the birth of our grandson and the marriage of our last single daughter. I talked about looking forward to romantic weekends and a second honeymoon, but then my tone shifted. "I thought we, as a couple, were moving in the same direction," I said. But then I came home from a trip and found this on our security system. The video clip began to play, and the party grew silent. The footage revealed Kendra and our daughters casually discussing their affairs, who they were with, what they did, and how they covered for each other. Kendra bragged about having 3 lovers over the past decade and mentioned she was already seeking a 4th. The video exposed how effortlessly they deceived their spouses, who remained oblivious to their real feelings. The clip ended, leaving the party in stunned silence. Spouses exchanged uneasy glances, and the air was thick with tension. What had started as a celebration had turned into a reckoning, one that many would not soon forget. As I drove east, far away from the chaos I had left behind, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. For Kendra and others, that night was unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. As the screen came back on, I spoke again, my voice calm but edged with bitterness. I wondered if they knew they were being recorded by our security system. If they did, it must have been a sick joke on me. If they didn't, then it revealed their true feelings about their spouses. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. Their words alone weren't enough for me to believe what I heard, but they planted a seed of doubt. What I found next, thanks to the investigators I hired, removed all doubt entirely. The next clip began, capturing footage of my wife and her boss, Eric Hopper, during their recent 2-week business trip. The video documented a series of moments that would look like a honeymoon to anyone unaware of their true circumstances. It showed them lounging naked on Vancouver's only nude beach, sharing a luxury suite at the Westin Bayshore Hotel, and registering as Mr. and Mrs. Hopper. There were romantic carriage rides through Stanley Park, intimate dinners, a moonlit boat ride, whale-watching excursions, and countless other activities that screamed romance rather than business. By the time the video ended, the truth was undeniable. I had been deceived repeatedly, and everyone watching now knew it. I concluded my recording with words that left no ambiguity. "I suppose this was your birthday gift to yourself, Kendra. Celebrating your 43rd with your newest love must have been exhilarating. I can't prove you spent every night of this trip sleeping with your boss, Eric Hopper, but I can't say you didn't either. I do know for certain that your room had only one double bed. I turned to my 3 sons-in-law in the video. Gentlemen, do you truly know what your wives are doing behind your back? Because I thought I did, and I was wrong. Are you confident your children are yours? Are mine even mine? Addressing Kendra directly, I said, how many of these so-called business trips were personal vacations with your lovers? Was I really that terrible as a husband and partner for so many years? And if you were that unhappy, why didn't you ask for a divorce? Was it easier to lie and cheat? I saved my most scathing remarks for last. Kendra, are you such a valuable employee to Eric Hopper because you're willing to sleep with him? What exactly is he paying you for? Does he pay extra for the special services? And what is the going rate for a married woman to be her boss's personal mistress? The video ended with one final bombshell. I wish I could be there to hear Eric Hopper's answers to these questions. I'm sure his wife, Karen, if she's in attendance, would also be interested in hearing them. The screen went dark. The patio was silent, the atmosphere heavy with discomfort and shock. My words had raised countless questions, shattering facades and ruining reputations. Even in California, where social norms can be more lenient, the revelations were jarring. This birthday party was one no one would forget. As I later learned, the fallout was immediate. My wife Kendra and our 3 daughters were in tears by the end of the video. I couldn't tell if their tears stemmed from guilt, shame, or simply the sting of being exposed. I doubted any of them were thinking of me in that moment. The final twist came when Karen Hopper, Eric's wife, stood up and pulled out 2 legal envelopes. With icy precision, she served divorce papers to both Eric and Kendra right there on the spot. According to those who were present, Karen took great satisfaction in slapping Kendra and hurling a string of insults at her before leaving. Eric, humiliated and blindsided, realized too late that Karen had been working with my lawyer all along. The revelations had shattered 5 marriages that night. My sons-in-law confronted their wives, demanding the full truth before even considering letting them back into their homes. Kendra's and Eric's reputations were in tatters, their carefully constructed facades obliterated. As for me, I was already miles away, driving into a new chapter of my life, leaving the wreckage of betrayal far behind. Even though the younger generation often held different views on morals and principles, there were some lines that, once crossed, left consequences that couldn't be ignored. But this was California, where perspectives on relationships and values sometimes diverged sharply. Unfortunately, it took something as drastic as this to make those involved confront their realities. I drove for hours until fatigue crept in, pulling off the road to find a motel. Parking the truck where the office staff could keep an eye on it, I checked in and carried a suitcase and my new phone to the room. After a refreshing shower, I prepared for bed, plugged in the phone to charge, and lay down. Curiosity got the better of me, so I turned the phone on to check for messages from the woman who had my number. There was one. The text read, "Home from the party. Call me." Karen, my divorce lawyer, answered before the 3rd ring. "Hi, darling," I said lightly. "How did your day go?" "Better than we expected," Karen replied, her tone carrying a hint of amusement. Eric and I arrived at the house about an hour before the party started. There were about 50 people there, and everyone was in a great mood. For 5 hours, the event was seamless. Kendra was thrilled. She acted like the queen bee of the evening. She paused briefly before continuing, a trace of laughter in her voice. Then, just as the night was winding down, your daughters played your video. That changed everything. Karen paused again, collecting her thoughts. "Because of what you revealed, I've picked up 3 new clients." When the clip of your wife and daughters talking so casually about their affairs came on, everyone was stunned. And when the footage of Kendra's romantic getaway with Eric played, it removed any doubt that the earlier conversation was real. She chuckled softly. You should have seen their faces when they all blurted out, "Oh shit, we're screwed," in unison. It was priceless. And when I served the divorce papers, the crowd scattered like someone yelled fire. Your sons-in-law came up to me afterward and asked if I handled divorces. I told them yes and walked out with 3 retainers by the end of the night. It looks like your daughter's marriages might not survive this either. Karen's tone shifted, now sounding satisfied. I drove Eric's car home and left him there. Serves him right. Did anyone try to call me? I asked, smiling at the mental image of the chaos. Karen laughed. Oh, they did? Kendra found your phone in the kitchen garbage after most of the guests had left. The sight of it sitting there, discarded, said everything. It was your way of saying you were done. With all of them. I chuckled. Let the countdown begin. 6 months until the divorce is finalized. I don't regret finding that conversation on the security system. Without it, I wouldn't have met you. Karen sighed, her voice softening. Do you still want everything sold and converted to cash? Yes, I said firmly. Unless Kendra can buy me out. With so many people leaving California, selling could work in my favor. But she'll start panicking tomorrow when she learns I'm no longer with my former employer. I'll put my practice up for sale tomorrow, too, Karen said thoughtfully. My sister and her husband are excited to meet you. He still talks about how you helped him secure his tractor dealership a few years back. This new reality they've created is just beginning to unfold, I replied. I wonder if they'll still be laughing when the dust settles. We said our goodbyes, and I hung up, feeling a rare sense of peace. Meanwhile, Kendra stood in the kitchen, holding my discarded phone, a wave of helplessness washing over her. She wanted to tell me Eric Hopper meant nothing to her, that our 3 daughters were truly mine. But she knew deep down that it didn't matter anymore. I no longer cared. This was my way of declaring to everyone that I was done. Her lies had brought this upon herself. She had been too selfish to consider the consequences of getting caught. The thrill, excitement, and fleeting satisfaction of infidelity were not worth the cost. And now, there was no going back. Loy remained a small town at heart, a place where forgiveness might come, but forgetting never would. The whispers and judgment would follow Kendra wherever she went, a constant reminder of the life she had destroyed. My actions had sent a clear message. I had erased them all from my life. Kendra hoped Colin's anger would subside in time, as it always had. Over the years, he'd forgiven her bad behavior countless times. Perhaps he would again, though deep down, she knew this time might be different. Reflecting on her life, Kendra realized she hadn't deliberately chosen her lifestyle. It had developed gradually. Her progressive mindset often led her to deflect blame, never taking responsibility. She had convinced herself that no one was getting hurt. What started as a single affair became 2, then 3. Eric Hopper was her latest lover. Until that fateful day, she never imagined getting caught. Colin had been oblivious because their busy careers kept them occupied. When they were together, they focused on each other and shut out the world. Ironically, her own carelessness had tipped him off. Now, her reckless actions had not only destroyed her marriage but also put her daughter's relationships at risk. Meanwhile, my life took an unexpected turn when I first met Karen. Although we grew up just 20 miles apart, our age difference meant our paths had never crossed. She was assigned as my divorce lawyer, and during our initial consultation, I shared the incriminating video. Her shock was palpable when she realized that the man my wife was discussing was likely her own husband. We confirmed it through Karen's Facebook research. From that moment, we both knew our marriages were over. The shared betrayal became a foundation for mutual support. What began as professional collaboration turned into a bond forged by shared pain and understanding. We spent hours discussing our emotions, betrayal, anger, hurt, and even hatred. Through these conversations, we found solace in each other's company. Talking about our shared rural roots and childhood experiences brought moments of lightness to otherwise dark times. Over time, our connection deepened, though we agreed to keep things platonic until our divorces were finalized. This mutual understanding and respect laid the groundwork for something neither of us had been seeking, but both had found. 12 days ago, just after I said goodbye to Kendra, Karen called upset. She had told her daughters about their father's infidelity, but they didn't believe her. I asked to speak to her eldest daughter, explaining the situation and suggesting they see the evidence before judging. An hour later, Karen's daughters arrived at my home. I showed them the house's security system, explaining how the internal cameras worked. Then I played the footage of my wife and our daughters. Incriminating conversation. The girls were visibly shaken. Hearing their father's intimate discussions about his affair was jarring. "This is what your mother saw," I explained. "Her ethics prevented her from telling you directly. Your father and my wife are on a business trip right now, but I have investigators gathering more evidence. Kendra will be served with divorce papers upon her return." We had a heartfelt discussion about the importance of vows, trust, and the long road to rebuilding broken relationships. I shared my concern that Kendra's behavior might have influenced our daughters negatively, normalizing deceit in their relationships. Meadow, Karen's youngest, offered a profound observation. If our spouses respected us, they would never have betrayed us. Karen later told me her daughters found her easier to approach after our conversation. Amber, her eldest, mentioned that I reminded her of her grandfather, someone who could simplify complex issues, a trait tied to our shared rural upbringing. Both Karen and I found comfort in revisiting the values of a simpler life, far removed from the relentless pace and competitiveness of our current environment. The next morning, I packed up and hit the road again, heading east on Interstate 80. As I drove, I felt the weight of the past begin to lift. Each mile brought me closer to a fresh start, a chance to rebuild in a place where life was simpler and trust still mattered. By tonight, I hope to be out of Nevada and into northern Utah, near the Wyoming border. Taking my time to explore the sights I had always wanted to see was surprisingly soothing. Despite everything, I felt at peace. That evening, after checking into a cozy inn, I logged into my new email account. A message awaited me from my oldest son-in-law, David, along with his phone number. I dialed. "Hi, David," I greeted. "Hi, Dad. Glad you called," he replied. "Where are you?" "I'm on the road, licking my wounds," I said with a chuckle. "Well, that's what I'll tell the people asking about you," David said, laughing. "It's been a crazy day. Kendra showed up at the office this morning, demanding to know where you were. She claimed she was going to catch a plane to work things out with you. She still thinks she can save the relationship?" I asked. "Apparently," he said, "when she learned you had retired, she wanted confirmation. I was called to talk to her. When I told her you'd taken early retirement and were moving, she accused me of lying and demanded to know where your retirement checks were being sent. I laughed despite myself. How did that end?" "Security had to escort her out," David replied. "But it gets better. Carrie called and said her mom got fired right after Eric Hopper was served with your $5 million alienation of affection lawsuit. She had to take a taxi home." David continued. "Kendra went straight to a labor lawyer. They served Eric around 4 p.m. Carrie wants to come home to see our son, but I told her nothing would happen until I confirmed the DNA. She claims she hasn't been unfaithful since we married, but that's not what her own words in the recording suggest." I chuckled. At least they're not pestering me about it. This impromptu vacation has turned out to be one of the best things I've done in a while. "Are you really going to divorce her, Dad?" David asked. "The twins moved in with Kendra, and my wife is staying there too," David said. "No one wants to deal with them right now. Everyone's too upset to think straight. As for divorce, it depends on what the DNA test reveals. If he's not my son, there's no reason to stay together. Take your time," I advised. It took me months to sort through my emotions and decide what I could live with. "Don't rush." "I appreciate that," David said. "So, are you coming back anytime soon?" "Only if my lawyers need me in court," I said. "The place I'm moving to has lower taxes and a lower cost of living. I'll be financially better off. Plus, the CEO wants me to work as an advisor remotely." I agreed on the condition that I never have to wear a suit or tie. "Well, Dad, they already miss you here," David said. "People would bring you their ideas, and you'd point out what worked and what didn't." "Is this your new number?" "Yes, but keep it to yourself for now," I said. "And the next time you talk to Kendra, tell her she can go back to her other friends with benefits. After all, they were good enough before." Unbeknownst to me, David recorded our conversation and shared it with Kendra and my daughters. Later, I learned Kendra was furious, claiming I had no right to give her sons-in-law advice. But the tide was turning. My daughters were starting to see the consequences of following their mother's example. Their husbands wanted as little to do with them as possible, and the rift between them and Kendra was growing. My next call was to Karen, who was thrilled to hear from me. Her firm had been inundated with 5 new divorce cases sparked by my wife's infamous birthday party. Some of Kendra's former partners had been outed, adding fuel to the fire. Karen mentioned Kendra's firing, noting it was Eric's desperate attempt to reconcile. However, Karen was unmoved. She had already been briefed by the board of directors, who had explained everything. By lunchtime, I finally reached my hometown after a 3-day journey. Pulling into a small diner, I decided to grab a bite before heading to the family farm. As I sipped my coffee, waiting for my burger and fries, I heard a familiar voice. "Well, I'll be. Is that you, Colin White?" The old-timer who walked in was none other than Uncle John. "It's good to see you, son. You're looking sharp," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Thanks, Uncle John," I replied, smiling. "Where's the family?" "They're at the house getting things ready. Had to fix some plumbing and clean up a bit, but the fridge is working and the stove's been patched up. It's livable, but you'll probably want to modernize." "Good to hear. Order some food on me, and let's catch up," I said. It felt good to be back. Before heading to the house, I stopped at the local grocery store. The prices here were a pleasant surprise, much cheaper than in California. I filled 2 carts with essentials. At the checkout, I ran into an old classmate, the cashier, and we spent a few minutes reminiscing. When I arrived at the family home, the sight warmed me. It looked much better than I'd expected. My aunt and cousins came out to greet me, helping to unload groceries and catch up over coffee. After they left, I took a closer look at the house. Uncle John had been right. It needed a lot of work. Later, I called Uncle John for recommendations on local construction crews. Within 2 hours, he returned with some builders to assess the property. By the time they left, we concluded that rebuilding would be more cost-effective than renovating. The house needed entirely new wiring, plumbing, and insulation. The barn, however, was salvageable. With a new roof, fresh boards, and a coat of paint, it could be converted into a shop for repairing tractors and heavy equipment. That evening, I called Karen to share the updates. We discussed designs and settled on a single-story house with a crawl space and double insulation to handle the harsh winters. It would have 4 bedrooms, a large garage, and a cold cellar for storage. The next morning, I finalized the plans with the contractor and arranged to have the old house taken down. I also returned the rental truck and bought a slightly used Ford pickup with low mileage. After transferring ownership and getting insurance, I made a stop at the bank to deposit funds and order new checks. The lower gas prices in the area were a pleasant surprise. In the afternoon, I visited Karen's older brother at his dealership. To my surprise, we had attended high school together. He was enthusiastic about my plans and offered me a job on the spot, joking about my relationship with his sister. We laughed about his first impressions of her ex-husband, agreeing that he had always been a puzzle. Later, the contractor and I finalized the details for the new house. It would have an open floor plan, a large kitchen, a mudroom with garage access, and a backup generator. The cost would be manageable with my divorce settlement, and I felt a sense of relief as the pieces of my new life began falling into place. That evening, Karen and I caught up, and I updated her on the progress with the house and my meeting with her brother. She was thrilled to hear everything was moving forward. Just as we wrapped up, I received a call from David. "Kendra is not giving up," he said. "She's hired a private investigator to track you down. She still thinks she can fix things." I chuckled. "Let her try. She'll be disappointed." The thought of Kendra trying to untangle the mess she had created didn't bother me anymore. My focus was on building a better future, one where the mistakes of the past would no longer weigh me down. I told David there was nothing left to salvage in my relationship with Kendra. Even if we reconciled, she would likely repeat her actions. David paused to reflect, admitting that many intelligent people often miss simple truths, which is why there are so many systemic issues in our government. I explained that Kendra didn't see her behavior as the problem. To her, I was the one who needed to be retrained to accept her choices. She wasn't sorry for her actions, only for getting caught. David acknowledged the harsh truth of my perspective and said he needed to have a frank conversation with Carrie about understanding equality in marriage. He mentioned a saying his father used, "What's good for the goose is good for the gander." He had come to realize that his mother often viewed him as a means to an end. I suggested that David insist on marriage counseling, preferably with a conservative counselor, to expose Carrie to a different perspective. He agreed, noting that if Carrie couldn't find a balance, their marriage might not survive, and he might need to walk away for his own peace of mind. To keep myself busy, I began working on the barn, tearing out the old stalls. The physical labor was challenging but satisfying, and it felt good to put my muscles to use again. I found a surprising sense of peace in the process. On Thursday evening, I received an unexpected call from Karen. "Your daughters think you need cheering up," she said, her tone warm. "They called my brother to tell him about our divorces. What they didn't know was that he's known for over 4 months." Karen went on to explain that Meadow had shared how I discovered their father's affair and how our paths had crossed. Her brother, Joseph, had explained to them how I had helped him secure the dealership years ago. "They even talked about us for an hour," Karen said. "Eventually, everything came out. They were surprised their favorite uncle approved of our relationship. But they seemed to understand. Just make sure they don't let that slip," I said. "Kendra has hired a private investigator to find me. She thinks she can talk me into forgiving her." "How do you know that?" Karen asked, intrigued. "I've been in touch with my oldest son-in-law. He's keeping me updated," I replied. "It's also been helping him work through his own decisions about his marriage." "That makes sense," Karen said with a chuckle. "And don't worry, my daughters won't spill anything after everything they've done." "What do you mean by that?" I asked, curious. "They booked me a flight with my own credit card. I arrive at the regional airport tomorrow night at 8 p.m., she said, laughing. "Start living the dream, Mom," they told me. The next evening, I waited at the airport with a dozen red roses, feeling an unfamiliar mix of excitement and nerves. As Karen approached, her brunette hair framing her face beautifully, I couldn't help but smile. She looked effortlessly lovely in blue jeans, a yellow blouse, and a soft jacket. After picking up her suitcase, we headed to Ruby Tuesdays for dinner, where her brother and sister-in-law were waiting to surprise her. By the end of the meal, Karen had agreed to represent her brother as his lawyer once she moved back home. Later, as we drove down the long driveway to my childhood home, I wondered how Karen would react. The snug, 60s-style house held memories of simpler times. When she stepped inside, her face lit up with delight. After settling in, I poured her a beer and put on some of my parents' old records. Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., and Frank Sinatra filled the room as we snuggled on the couch, reminiscing like teenagers. We were taking things slow, determined to ensure we were heading in the right direction. Meanwhile, Kendra's frustration grew. She was accustomed to getting her way, but every effort to track me down led to a dead end. There were no flight records, no rental car transactions, and no active social media profiles to trace. Even her private investigators were stumped. My Facebook account was closed, my credit card was canceled at my request, and everything else had been carefully unlinked. To make matters worse for her, my lawyer continued to call daily, asking for the name of her legal representation. Kendra hadn't hired a lawyer yet. She still clung to the hope that our marriage could be saved. However, the walls were closing in, and the consequences of her actions were becoming impossible to ignore. She realized too late that she had overlooked critical details about Colin. His family, his habits, even basic identifiers like his social security number were now beyond her grasp. He had erased all traces of himself so thoroughly that not even their daughters could find him. Carrie, the eldest, was frustrated. David, her husband, refused to move forward until he could confirm that their son, little Colin, was biologically his. Despite her protests and confrontations, David's reaction was dismissive, even mocking, a far cry from the husband she thought she knew. Kendra's frustration grew. Colin had always been reliable, a man who did what needed to be done without complaint. Now his absence created a void no hired help could fill. Tasks once handled with care and love were now executed perfunctorily, leaving her to face the crumbling relationships around her. Her daughters blamed her for their failing marriages, and she refused to accept responsibility. In her mind, Colin's disobedience was the root of the problem. Every man needs to understand, she told herself bitterly, that women are the bosses in relationships. She was determined to find Colin and make him pay for the chaos his absence had caused. Meanwhile, I was enjoying a peaceful morning with Karen, sitting on the porch of my childhood home. watching the sunrise with a cup of coffee in hand. For the first time, I understood why my parents cherished this simple ritual. This, Karen said, her voice soft, is what it feels like to truly live, to feel appreciated by the universe, to sit here with you, knowing we see the world the same way. It's everything. I took her hand, and in that silent gesture, I conveyed all the things words couldn't express. Driving home later, I reflected on how much I had changed. I'm finding myself again, I said, breaking the comfortable silence. I feel more secure, more at peace than I ever remember being. Karen smiled. I see it too. You found a stillness most people spend their lives searching for. It's real here. Nothing feels fake. Her words echoed my own thoughts. In this quiet life, free from the noise of the city and the expectations of others, we were both beginning to rediscover who we were. That weekend marked a turning point for us. We spent time together, sharing stories, learning about each other in ways we hadn't before. Though the chemistry between us was undeniable, we chose not to rush into a physical relationship. We wanted more, something deeper, more meaningful. Karen introduced me to her parents, and I spent the afternoon fixing her dad's tractor. By the time I finished, I was covered in grease and dirt, and Karen couldn't stop smiling as she watched me clean up in the mudroom. Her mother was thrilled at the prospect of her daughter moving back home, and her father was grateful for the repairs. Saying goodbye at the airport on Sunday evening was bittersweet, but we both knew this was just the beginning. 2 months after leaving California, my life was moving forward. The court had finalized a 50-50 split of assets between Kendra and me. Meanwhile, Karen's ex-husband was dragging his feet in their divorce, trying to save every penny. David and Carrie were attending marriage counseling after confirming that little Colin was indeed his son. The process was slow, but Carrie was beginning to see things from David's perspective. Little Colin was thriving, and I was looking forward to meeting him soon. Faith and Hope, my other daughters, were reeling from the fallout of their divorces. Their ex-husbands, like David, couldn't bring themselves to trust them again. It was heartbreaking, but I understood their reasoning. The relationship between Kendra and our daughters had also suffered. Their trust in her was shattered, and the bond they once shared felt irreparably strained. I found myself back in Los Angeles, flown in by private jet to oversee the final testing of the company's newest product. This phase was crucial before mass production could begin. Despite the intensity of the work, I felt a sense of fulfillment I hadn't experienced in years. The contrast between my current life and the chaos I had left behind couldn't have been starker. Kendra was still trying to find me, convinced she could salvage our relationship. But the truth was simple. I was no longer the man she thought she could manipulate. I had moved on, and there was no going back. I would spend the next 2 weeks ensuring the new tractor model met every standard for durability, strength, ease of movement, and repairability. The firm had booked me into the Hampton Inn and Suites in town, which was convenient for the testing grounds. Little did I know, my evening would hold an unexpected reunion. Amber Hopper had arranged dinner at the hotel restaurant with her mother, Karen. They were already seated when I walked in. Amber caught sight of me and smiled warmly as I approached. "Mama, I hope you don't mind, but I invited a friend to join us," Amber said with a mischievous grin. "You might want to slide over and make some room." Karen looked at her daughter suspiciously. "Amber, what are you up to?" "It's someone I've gotten to know over the past few weeks," Amber replied. "Meadow and I both think you'll enjoy spending more time with him." As I slid into the booth, Karen turned to see who it was. Her face lit up with a huge smile as she recognized me. "Wow, what a surprise!" Karen exclaimed. "I love the new look, but what are you doing here?" "Well," I said, smiling back, "first, I'm here to have a nice dinner with my girlfriend and her daughter. During the meal, I'll explain the rest." Turning to Amber, I added, "Thanks for helping me pull off this little surprise." Just as we were starting to order, Meadow joined us, slightly flustered. "I hope I'm not too late," she said, settling into the booth. Work ran longer than I expected. During dinner, I explained my presence in town. I was there to test a new model of tractor designed to run on natural gas. If successful, the model would revolutionize farming, offering a cleaner and more affordable energy alternative. Farmers could even build their own refill stations on site, with the cost of fixtures included in the equipment package. As we finished our meal, Karen's daughters posed a question. Do you plan to be settled in South Dakota before school starts in September? Amber asked. Yes, that's the plan, Karen replied. Why? Amber hesitated, then said, I'll be starting my MBA at the University of South Dakota this fall. Can I live with you too? If not, I'll stay with Uncle Joseph. Karen's eyes welled with tears, but she managed to smile. I reached over to hold her hand. We're building a new 4-bedroom house, I said. It'll be finished next month. We wanted to be ready in case you both decided to join us. So let your mom know what colors you'd like for your rooms. Meadow chimed in. You were hoping we'd come, weren't you? More like praying, Karen admitted. We wanted you to make the decision on your own. Amber studied me thoughtfully. That first night we met, you figured us out, didn't you, Colin? I smiled. I had a hunch. Amber, I knew your path would involve further education. Meadow, your perspective on respect and integrity told me you'd make the choice that felt right for you. As we were leaving the restaurant, Karen and I planned to see a movie, while Amber and Meadow headed home. Just then, Kendra pulled into the parking lot. She spotted me opening the car door for Karen, though it took her a moment to recognize me. My transformation, a leaner frame, defined muscles, and a newfound vitality, left her staring as we drove away. Since moving back to South Dakota, my lifestyle had changed dramatically. Days spent working on the barn, installing a wood stove, and cleaning up had not only reshaped my body but also my spirit. The old stress and pot belly were gone, replaced with a sense of purpose and a youthful energy I hadn't felt in years. I was no longer the man Kendra had once manipulated, and seeing her that night solidified one thing. I had been reborn, free from the weight of the past, ready to embrace the future. Parts of my soul that had been hidden in the shadows of past relationships were finally surfacing, as if set free. After dropping Karen off following the movie, I returned to my suite and requested a wake-up call for the next morning. I was eager to dive into what I enjoyed most, evaluating a finished product ready for final approval before mass production. The security team signed me in early, recognizing me immediately. By the time the rest of the team arrived, I had already started testing the new tractor design. I'd identified a couple of minor issues and even rerouted the feeding line to avoid exposure to direct heat. The changes were documented for my final report. When the president arrived, he found me testing the massive tractor on the mudbed we prepared. He couldn't help but laugh when he saw me, dressed in blue jeans, a white t-shirt, and a backward baseball cap, maneuvering the machine like I owned it. Colin, you're still the man, he said, grinning. If anyone could flip this tractor on its head and still make it work, it's you. What's your first impression? It's a beast, I replied, shaking his hand. With just a couple of tweaks, it's passing every test. The fuel efficiency alone puts it ahead of our diesel models. If it performs as well over the next 9 days, it'll be one of our top 5 designs. He smiled and said, We'd give you your old position back in a heartbeat, but judging by the way you look, I understand why you moved on. Where did you find the fountain of youth? Little did he know, my secret to testing equipment was simple. Treat it like my first truck, a piece of junk that needed to prove itself worthy. By the end of the day, the tractor had withstood every test, leaving me impressed. It was almost 8 p.m. when I returned to the hotel, exhausted and covered in dried mud. As I entered the lobby, I spotted Carrie and David waiting for me, with little Colin in Carrie's arms. She approached me with a warm smile. Hi, Dad, she said. You look great. Do you have time to talk? I glanced at David, who gave me a nod of encouragement. Sure, I said. Let me grab a shower first. You can wait here or come up to my suite. It's got a kitchen, and we can order food. Carrie agreed. While I cleaned up, they arranged room service. After my shower, I got a call from Karen, and I told her about the unexpected visit, promising to call her later. I joined my daughter and son-in-law, opening a bottle of Crown Royal for us to share. Carrie began hesitantly. Dad, David and I have been working through a lot these past 2 months. The conversation you uncovered forced us to face issues we hadn't dealt with. I just moved back home last week. Mom had been talking about her outside relationships for years. We all thought you knew and approved. She justified it by saying you two had mismatched drives. David chimed in, we were at a breaking point, so she got a polygraph test to help clear the air. That's when things started to shift. I nodded, holding little Colin against my chest, his tiny head resting on my shoulder. David snapped a picture of the moment. It's going to take time, I said, in complete honesty to rebuild something new. The damage done isn't erased overnight. Carrie's eyes filled with tears. I've realized how much I was acting like mom, justifying my actions through my perspective alone. It's been a wake-up call. I stop and think now, instead of just reacting. David smiled. This side of her, it's something I didn't know existed. It gives me hope. I think we've got more than a 50% chance of making it work. Their words reminded me of something Karen had said earlier. The beauty of rediscovering simplicity and integrity. Watching Carrie take accountability and seeing the glimmers of hope in her and David's relationship was both humbling and encouraging. Life, as messy as it was, continued to teach us all. Just remember, it takes time, honest communication, and a willingness to truly listen with both heart and mind, I said. You're young, so don't hesitate to seek independent advice or counseling if needed. Your mother, Kendra, allowed societal views to interfere with our marriage until she convinced herself that throwing away her vows was justified. I bet she still blames me for its end, I added. Dad, you're right, Carrie said, her voice firm. I told my sisters that I was done listening to her excuses. I have a marriage I want to save. We argued, and I made it clear, when they're ready to face reality, we can talk. Until then, don't waste my time. Our food arrived, lightening the mood. Sharing dinner with Carrie and David felt unexpectedly natural. Carrie asked if I'd been following a diet plan, and I laughed, explaining that I hadn't. My body had simply transformed as a result of physical work on the farm instead of endless hours at a desk or on the couch. It was past 10 by the time they left. As she hugged me goodbye, Carrie whispered, I like this new version of you, Dad. I laughed, explaining, since the divorce, parts of me that I'd suppressed are finally coming to the surface. Being with your mom for so long had changed me in ways I didn't even realize. Later, I texted Karen to see if she was awake. When she replied, I called to share how the evening had gone. Time heals all wounds is a saying we often hear, but I told her it wasn't true. Time simply helps us accept what has happened. It doesn't make it right or erase the hurt. It only allows us to move forward. Faith and hope were learning that lesson the hard way. The next night, around 7 p.m., I walked into the lobby of the Hampton Inn again, only to find my twin daughters, Faith and Hope, waiting for me. My first thought? Kendra had sent them to double down on me, and I was right. They wasted no time lecturing me about my cowardly treatment of their mother. In their eyes, leaving my marriage was unforgivable. I invited them back to my suite for privacy, and there they unleashed a torrent of accusations, blaming me for walking out and for the failures of their own marriages. They claimed their husbands couldn't handle their modern, liberated lifestyles, just like I couldn't handle Kendra's. I'd had enough. Calmly, I called security. When the staff arrived, I asked them to escort my daughters out, stating that I was not interested in their self-righteous arguments. The security staff didn't hold back, either. They told Faith and Hope not to return, adding that they didn't appreciate high-class hookers, disturbing their guests or spreading potential issues. The looks on my daughters' faces were priceless. When I shared this with Karen later, she couldn't stop laughing. Those young ladies are going to have a lot to think about tonight, she said. Without love, someone is always paying for the sex one way or another. Can I tell Amber and Meadow about this? Go ahead, I replied, chuckling. If this isn't a wake-up call, I don't know what is. 2 hours later, Carrie called my room. Bravo, Dad, she said, laughing. Faith and Hope just left my place, still in tears. They finally learned that their actions have consequences. It's about time. I couldn't resist laughing as well. Neither of them would let me explain anything earlier. Their behavior left me no choice but to call security. Hopefully, this will make them reconsider their attitudes. They were humiliated, Carrie said, her tone more serious. I told them that when they allowed their friends with benefits to wine and dine them, they were essentially being paid for it. Judging by their reactions, I think they finally understood. And honestly, I'm ashamed I ever entertained that kind of thinking myself. Did David join the conversation? I asked. Absolutely, Carrie said. He made it clear he wouldn't tolerate excuses anymore. We've come a long way, Dad, and it's because you gave us the push we needed to face the truth. As the conversation ended, I realized that while not everyone would accept the lessons life was throwing at them, some, like Carrie, were beginning to see the light. He heard it all and was pleasantly surprised by how I explained things. It helped us a lot, Carrie said, as she continued. We're starting to see things clearly now. How could our mother convince us that her actions were acceptable? Faith and Hope are really struggling. It's going to take time for them to process everything. She paused for a moment before adding, until recently, they didn't see that their behavior made them no better than the people they used to look down on. I asked them to think about this. You criticized Dad for how he reacted. Did you ever stop to consider how your actions and Mom's affected him? Or were you only concerned with yourselves? That, Dad, is something I'm still trying to answer for myself. Carrie sighed. Mom painted our world with rose-colored glasses, using her so-called progressive views to justify anything and everything. It wasn't until she was caught that Faith and Hope began to see reality for what it was. It's sad that much of society is still wearing those same glasses, blind to the truth staring them in the face. I nodded. Carrie, you've learned something that many people never understand in their lifetime, I said. What's that, Dad? She asked. The ability to think logically, even about the simplest things, I replied. That's what sets people like your mother and me apart. Welcome to my world, Carrie. It's too bad you had to learn it the hard way. On Wednesday night, I joined Karen and her daughters for a family dinner. The girls were eager to start planning their move, and I shared what I had learned from Carrie the night before. After dinner, we tackled the dishes together, me washing, the girls drying and putting away. At one point, the girls caught Karen and me sharing a kiss. They teased us relentlessly for the rest of the evening, but the warmth in their smiles made it worth it. On Friday evening, Karen and I went to a waterfront restaurant for a private dinner. As we sat across from each other, enjoying a pre-dinner drink, the twins walked in. The host approached our table. Your daughters noticed you missed their wave and were wondering if you would allow them to join you, the host said. I hesitated, but Karen didn't. Yes, we'd love to have them join us, she said, giving me a reassuring look. I moved to sit beside her. You can't leave things like this with them, Karen said softly. I know you're upset, but you still love them. You need to hear them out. She was right, even if I didn't want to admit it. The hostess brought Faith and Hope to our table, and their expressions told us they had a lot on their minds. Once they sat down, I introduced Karen. Faith and Hope, this is Karen. Not only is she my lawyer, but she's now my girlfriend. If you're here to berate me again, please leave, I said firmly. Faith spoke first. Dad, we deserve that. On Tuesday, Carrie had a brutally honest talk with us. We went to her expecting support, but got the harsh truth instead. She didn't hold back, and by the time she was done, we knew exactly what our behavior said about us, and it wasn't flattering. Hope chimed in. Carrie pointed out that we were essentially being paid for our actions, just in a different way than street workers. At least they do it out of necessity. We did it for fun, thinking we weren't doing anything wrong. That makes our behavior worse. Faith added, when we got home, we confronted Mom. It turned into a huge argument. She dismissed us, saying we'd been brainwashed by your conservative nonsense. She said, so what if others got hurt? They should grow up. The only real crime is getting caught. That's when it hit us. She feels no remorse. Faith continued. Mom's views made us justify everything we did, even when it was wrong. She'd use examples of politicians and society to claim that there are no consequences for so-called social crimes. But now, we see that it's all a lie. We've rented a furnished apartment nearby for 6 months. It's close to the school where we both teach. I looked at them, seeing genuine remorse in their eyes. It's not easy to face your mistakes and take responsibility, I said. It's a long road, but it's worth it. Karen reached over and gave my hand a supportive squeeze. That evening, as we shared a meal, I felt a glimmer of hope for my family. We were far from perfect, but perhaps this was a step toward healing. We both agree this is the first step in rebuilding our lives, Faith said. It's time to stop living under Mother's lies and figure out who we are without her influence. Hope and I are moving in tomorrow since Mom will be busy with some political event," she added. "When we saw you, we realized we had to apologize because we were so wrong. Dad, you didn't have a choice. You did what you had to do," Hope admitted. "If you had confronted us directly, it would have been 4 against 1. You knew we needed to work through it on our own. Sometimes you just have to let things work themselves out," I replied. "You were already forgiven. I saw your behavior as a product of your mother's influence. While I can forgive, I'll never give Kendra a second chance. Her actions have always been self-centered and intentional." With that, I handed them my phone and asked them to add their contact information. They did so and saved my new number in their phones. "What area is this number for?" Hope asked. "South Dakota," I said. "OMG, you moved back to Grandpa's farm?" Faith exclaimed with a big smile. "He would be so proud. You know the farm?" Karen asked, intrigued. "Yes," Hope replied. "Dad made sure we spent every summer there growing up, until high school when we developed the typical teenage attitude. We all learned to drive on Grandpa's tractor. Dad always drove us out and picked us up. Every night he'd talk to us, but we never heard from Mom while we were there. For her, it was always out of sight, out of mind. Grandma used to say Mom was the shallowest person she ever knew. So, Dad, why are you in town?" Faith asked. "And Karen, can we get your phone number?" Dinner turned into a lively celebration. The twins learned about the new house we were building and the reasons behind my trip to town. They also discovered that Karen had 2 daughters, both a bit younger than them. While we ate, Hope received a text from Carrie, asking if they were okay. Hope texted back, having dinner with Dad and his girlfriend Karen. Faith and I will stop by later to explain everything. After dinner, Karen and I strolled along the pier, enjoying the peaceful night. Karen looked at me, surprised. "You moved away from them, forcing them to figure it out on their own. That's not something most people would do. My dad always said, give a person enough rope and they'll hang themselves," I replied. It's true. Their own behavior, called out by their peers, forced them to see the truth. If I'd been here, it would have been 4 against 1. Instead, they had to face their own reality. Their sense of honesty and morality brought them down. "Evil doesn't thrive without someone carrying out its desires," Karen added. "Too often, people blame others instead of taking responsibility. In many ways, I was their scapegoat," I said. "I couldn't align with what they did because, in my eyes, it was never right." To Kendra, "That was a weakness to exploit," Karen said. "But I see it as one of your strengths. You've shown you're solid, grounded, and unwilling to compromise your values." Meanwhile, Kendra came home expecting to find faith and hope. The political event had run later than expected, but she hoped to take them out for the evening. Reflecting on their last argument, she realized she had pushed too far. It had turned ugly because she saw traits of their father in them, traits she couldn't allow to flourish. Throwing her purse on the counter, Kendra went to the refrigerator for a Coke. That's when she saw 2 house keys sitting on the counter, weighted down by a short note. "We have moved out. We don't like what you helped us to become. Good luck with your life." It was signed by Faith and Hope. Later that evening, Carrie confronted her mother. "I haven't heard from Faith and Hope since Tuesday night when Dad had security escort them out of the Hampton Inn," Carrie said, gauging Kendra's reaction. "Why would he do that?" Kendra asked sharply. "They went there to lecture him about how badly he treated you," Carrie explained. "But they came at him like they wanted to tear him down. Dad had enough and called security," Carrie said. "When they showed up, Dad told them he wasn't buying whatever they were trying to sell. Security then escorted them out the back door, thinking they were high-class escorts. But they're not, and you know that," Kendra replied, her voice tinged with worry. Carrie nodded, recounting how Faith and Hope arrived at her house in tears, spilling the whole story. "Do you want to know what I said to them, Mother?" Carrie asked pointedly. "Maybe I do," Kendra replied cautiously. Carrie leaned in. "I told them when their so-called friends with benefits were whining and dining them, it wasn't out of generosity. They were being paid in advance." The color drained from Kendra's face as Carrie spoke. For a moment, she sat in stunned silence before the words hit her like a sledgehammer. Tears began streaming down her face. Those simple, unfiltered words exposed the unvarnished truth about her lifestyle and its repercussions. She now realized that Colin's stark statements in his video weren't spiteful. They were raw, undeniable truths. The weight of it all crushed her. Kendra couldn't deny it anymore. Her romantic escapades, which she had once justified as harmless fun, were no different than transactions. By her actions, she had not only betrayed her husband, but also inadvertently set her daughters down the same path. The thought that Colin had silently endured this humiliation for over a decade made her stomach turn. For the first time, Kendra saw the depth of the damage she had caused. Colin's decision to leave hadn't been rash or vengeful. It had been a necessity. She realized he had spared her the ultimate humiliation by simply walking away rather than exposing her publicly. But now, in her solitude, the gravity of her choices left her with nothing but regret. Later that afternoon, Karen and I returned from a grocery run. After unloading the car, we sat at the kitchen table with her daughters, Amber and Meadow, enjoying coffee and light conversation. It was peaceful until Meadow, with a mischievous grin, mentioned, "Mom, just so you know, Amber and I invited some of our extended family over for a little get-together this afternoon." Karen raised an eyebrow. "When exactly were you planning to tell us this?" Meadow shrugged with a smirk. Now seemed like a good time. As we were preparing for the barbecue, Karen and I ran into Kendra at the grocery store. She stood in front of me, looking drained and distant. "Colin," she began hesitantly, "please let the girls know I'm selling the house. If they want anything, Carrie still has a key. They can take what they want while I'm at work. The same goes for you." I nodded. "I'll pass on the message and give Karen power of attorney to act for me. As for me, I already took everything I wanted when I left. I'm only in town for another 6 days." Kendra nodded, then turned and walked away without another word. Karen and I exchanged glances as we continued shopping. "Something's happened to her," I said. She seemed completely out of it. "You think it's because the twins moved out?" Karen asked. "No, she was used to being alone after I left. This feels like something bigger, something unexpected. Selling that house is a big deal for her. She loved it. Whatever's going on must have hit her hard." During the barbecue, the atmosphere was light and warm. All 5 of our daughters interacted with each other like old friends, bridging gaps and mending wounds. Amber and Meadow doted on little Colin, while David and I stood on the sidelines, content to observe. At some point, Faith and Hope opened up about the letter they had left for their mother. They explained how Carrie's brutal honesty had shaken them, forcing them to confront their choices. It was clear that all 5 daughters were slowly rebuilding their connections with one another, independent of Kendra's influence. I shared the brief encounter with Kendra at the grocery store, and the twins listened intently. "She seemed deeply affected," I said, like something else had shifted in her world. "Selling that house was never part of her plans." Faith sighed. "She doesn't understand what she's lost yet. But when she does, it'll be too late." Hope nodded. "For now, we just need to focus on our own lives." "Dad, thank you for giving us the space to figure it out ourselves." Karen smiled, taking my hand under the table. That evening, surrounded by family, the pieces of my new life felt like they were finally falling into place. David mentioned wanting the large plasma TV, and Carrie just rolled her eyes. I chuckled quietly. Our first 2 family gatherings couldn't have gone better. After everyone left and we finished cleaning up, Karen and I sat on the porch with a cold beer, enjoying the peace. So Faith and Hope have distanced themselves from their mom because they want to figure out who they are without her influence? Amber asked, clearly trying to piece it together. "Exactly," I replied. "Why would they do that?" Karen asked. "They followed their mother's example and got entangled with friends with benefits. It cost them their first marriages," I explained. "It wasn't until I left Kendra that they started seeing their actions through a new lens. Last Tuesday, they confronted me about my treatment of their mom, but it didn't go well. I ended up asking security to remove them." Amber's eyes widened, and Meadow seemed intrigued as I continued. Later that night, during a heated discussion with Carrie, she told them something that cut through all the noise. When your friends with benefits were whining and dining you, they weren't doing it out of kindness. They were paying you in advance. That truth hit them hard. Amber looked shocked, and Karen leaned against me. That's an intense realization, she said softly. Amber Meadow, David chimed in. Your mother and I grew up learning that how the world perceives you often matters more than how you see yourself. Your actions tell the world who you are far more effectively than words ever can. Karen nodded in agreement. David's right. That's why Colin's actions, even when difficult, have raised questions but also shown his integrity. Faith and hope have taken accountability for their behavior. That's the first step in their healing, and I couldn't be prouder. The conversation left everyone thoughtful for a moment. Amber broke the silence with a playful smile. You're gonna make a great dad, Dad. Karen burst into laughter, and the mood lightened. The rest of the week passed quietly. Karen and I spent every moment we could together, cherishing the time before I had to leave. The new tractor I'd been testing exceeded all expectations, and the company president was thrilled. I named it Beta. Before heading home, we had one last family gathering. Faith and Hope were warming up to Karen's daughters, Amber and Meadow, while little Colin seemed inseparable from Karen. Her nurturing instincts were on full display. Karen finalized the asset split with Eric, who eagerly took the house in hopes of rebuilding his relationship with his daughters. Karen and I shared a quiet laugh, knowing he underestimated the emotional damage he'd caused. Karen drove me to the airport, where I picked up a U-Haul for the trip back. The homestead was fully renovated. The old house had been replaced, the barn refurbished, and even the yard spruced up. Uncle John had helped organize furniture deliveries and donated unneeded items from my parents' belongings to those in need. Seeing neighbors helping each other again reminded me of the simple, meaningful life I was returning to. When Karen picked me up at the airport, she was glowing with happiness. Amber and Meadow were with her, and as I stepped out, I dropped to one knee and proposed. Karen was speechless as I slid the ring onto her finger, and her daughters captured the whole moment on video. Amber and Meadow had arranged a celebratory dinner at a local restaurant with dancing and drinks. Our daughters and David joined us, and the evening was filled with laughter and joy. Karen and I barely got a break as the ladies kept us on the dance floor. When we returned to Karen's house, Meadow and Amber had a surprise. They handed Karen a large overnight bag and grinned mischievously. Mom, Dad, we booked you a suite at the Hampton Inn for the weekend, Amber said. Don't come back until Monday. At the hotel, we found a beautifully arranged basket with champagne, chocolates, strawberries, roses, and balloons. The card read, "Congratulations from your 5 daughters." It was one of the most thoughtful gestures I'd ever received. The weekend was blissful. Karen and I didn't leave the suite, savoring every moment together. On Monday morning, after a relaxing breakfast, we went to pick up the U-Haul. It was larger than I expected, and Karen teased me about waiting until later for the big reveal. That afternoon, Faith and Hope arrived with exciting news. They'd both been hired by the Vermilion School Board and were moving east as well. This is our first step toward rebuilding our lives, Faith said. We're done living under Mom's shadow and ready to figure out who we are. As we celebrated together, I couldn't help but feel grateful. Despite the challenges and heartbreak, life was coming together in ways I hadn't imagined. The road ahead looked bright. Karen generously gave Faith and Hope some of her furniture, and we planned to haul the items they had taken from their mother's house to a rental storage unit. The twins had rented a 3-bedroom house through a real estate agent, ensuring that when the weather turned bad, Amber would have a place to stay with them. It was a practical arrangement, highlighting how much they were rebuilding their lives. Meanwhile, I decided to drop the lawsuit against Eric Hopper. He agreed to cover all my court costs in Vancouver, which made it a worthwhile resolution for me. In late September, Karen and I both received our finalized divorce certificates. It marked the official end of 2 significant chapters in our lives. On the last Saturday in October, surrounded by our blended family, Karen and I exchanged vows. It was a beautiful, heartfelt ceremony. Carrie and David flew out with little Colin to be part of the special day, and the love and support in the room were palpable. Then Karen stunned everyone with a surprise announcement during her toast. She turned to me with a radiant smile and addressed the entire family. To my darling husband, Colin, and to all our loved ones gathered here today, I have something special to share. I'm thrilled to announce that our family will be growing. We're expecting a new little weight to join us in May. The doctor hasn't revealed whether it's a boy or a girl yet, but I couldn't be happier to share this news with all of you. The room erupted into cheers and applause. It was the perfect ending to a day filled with joy and the promise of new beginnings. And that's how Colin and Karen found their way back to happiness, rebuilding not just their lives, but creating a new family filled with love, respect, and hope for the future. Through heartbreak, betrayal, and resilience, this journey proves that sometimes letting go of the past is the only way to make room for something even better. Thank you for watching this incredible story of redemption and new beginnings. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this on Reddit Cheating Stories. Until next time, take care and stay strong.